Yeah, I'll give one a try. So a lot of the discussion's been around these complex workflows, and especially for laboratory automation types of tasks. And so one of the questions that I've been looking at, and there's been a bunch of different communities looking at this kind of thing at various institutions. A lot of the work's been going on with NERSC, and so what I'm curious about is whether any of you get exposed to the workflow orchestration level and the use of things like the super facility APIs, and how you're finding that, and what's working for you and what's not working, what's missing when you're trying to put together this kind of laboratory automation, quick feedback loop kind of complex workflow.
I'm taking notes, by the way, so please.
We heavily rely on NERSC actually for the small molecule SFX program. So that has been very useful for us. The hardest part, of course, is still being able to, because like for instance, LCLS upgrade had an upgrade. So the MFX instrument where we do our experiments relies on LCLS2 data. So that has been challenging because now you have a facility that like LCLS, an internal facility changing its data structure. And then NERSC, of course, is its own independent facility as well. So I think that kind of communication across if you're going to have a super facility model, that kind of internal communication between the two so that we don't kind of get surprised, I guess, is going to be really important in the future. But yeah, we've actually been very happy with our collaboration.
So it sounds like change management is one issue that you're
absolutely
trying to come. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Anyone else?
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if anybody else had a comment because everybody was doing it, I thought, but it's fine.
I was going to ask about the last talk as well, and just I was curious what the failure modes were when you fail to resolve a structure. Is it what goes wrong that you don't actually get a higher hit rate?
We actually don't know 100% every time. So sometimes it's the sample. So we try to pre-screen. So we ask users to do PX powder X-ray diffraction, maybe a lab source, synchrotron, SEM as well, or some kind of imaging, so we can actually see that the microcrystals are, have facets. They look like crystals, not clusters. But they have good, nice peaks that show this is a potential candidate for small molecule SFX. But oftentimes the unit cell determination is a failure point. So that is changing because the team that works, Dr. Daniel Paley, who's one of the kind of pioneers, is developing some new methods to do unit cell determination directly from the data, as opposed to relying on tools like GSAS2 and Topaz. But we also run into error propagation on the beamline side as well. So if we don't have a very good geometry of the detector, for instance, that can oftentimes make it very challenging to get good indexing rates or no indexing rates sometimes. There can be issues with the photon energy. So there's a lot of tiny little error propagations in the metadata that can sometimes really just toast the whole experiment. And we're still kind of learning from statistics exactly where some of those failure points are. Those are the ones that we know of currently.
Happen that the failure point is phasing, or is it usually upstream of that?
It's usually upstream, yeah. And we don't even get to, honestly, if we can get a merged data set, convergence using OLEX2 is relatively quick. Sometimes with the more complicated unit cells where we have things like twinning or pseudomeric twinning, or any kind of weird superstructure symmetry issues like that can kind of mess things up. But usually it's always poor indexing, to be honest. But we still run into the same problem that most SFX experiments have with partiality. So our R factors are still quite a bit higher than like a single crystal diffraction.
Please.
So Oliver mentioned uncertainty quantification, and you all are somewhat involved in the diffraction space. So I was curious for diffraction image processing, how much uncertainty can you tolerate before the application of a machine learning model is no longer valuable?
Yes, I can answer that from kind of a softer qualitative side. For imaging, it's helpful to have some quantified uncertainty just to make a binary like judgment about whether the reconstruction is reliable at all or not. But the the most compelling use of ML in that situation is as a supporting tool where eventually you'll probably still run conventional reconstruction. But if you seed the conventional iterative solver with an initial guess from the machine learning model, that will cut down the number of iterations a factor of 10 maybe. And then during experiments, if you really want fast feedback, maybe you don't care as much about the reliability.
I can follow up for X-ray diffraction. In my work, at least, we don't, as far as integrated intensity goes, we don't filter anything by like signal to noise ratio or anything like that. I think this is kind of where CCTVX has gone as well. Nick can comment more probably, but I've moved from using a normally distributed error model to a more robust T-distributed one, and that allows me to that allows the model to ignore spurious data points if they exist, or low signal to noise regions in the data set.
I have a related question, because we're talking about AI. One of the challenges that I've found, and I wanted to get folks' opinion, even if, I mean, I've been dabbling in AI rather than making it my day job, but the challenge is I'm kind of blindly trying different architectures. Do you have any advice for people who want to integrate more AI into their scientific workflows? Like, what model architecture do you pick? Do you pick all of them? Like, how do we get started?
I mean, my own journey has been very trial and error. I think like maybe I would side in the try all of them camp and see what works.
You're not gonna make my life easier?
Well, I don't know what sort of data are you do, like image data? Try CNNs and vision transformers, right? Like that's a good starting point.
Right.
One of the things that I didn't really appreciate before hearing all the talks this morning, and I was wondering if the panelists could comment on this, is that when you're doing large scale data processing and the data rates are increasing and you're getting much more data than you did in the past, this has many apparently downstream effects and kind of forcing people out of the loop in various ways. Because not only are you getting more data, it's coming in faster. And so everything has to be done more quickly, and things that used to be able to be done by hand at all kind of stages of the pipeline now need to be automated. And this is one way in which the large scale data analytics kind of ties into the edge detection work that I didn't really appreciate previously, just the degree to which you can't really have human beings touching any of the processes along the way once you get to these kinds of rep rates and scales. And so I guess it gets to your change management comment as well.
Yeah, that's there was a paper I read where an Excel review paper where the person said no one should be thinking during an Excel experiment because we can't think fast enough.
Also, you're sleep deprived.
And
usually.
you're sleep deprived. Skills are also pretty low, especially on night shifts. But yeah, there are lots of times where human intervention is oftentimes almost detrimental to the outcome because, like, you have to make these experience. Instrument science, especially, we have to make decisions sometimes about a user's experiments with very limited information because we're waiting sometimes for data processing results, and there's an emphasis on collecting as much data as possible. And because Excel sometimes is precious, so it is very hard to rely on intervention and human thinking sometimes when we're working with these kinds of rates. Automation is going to the future for Excel experiments because it's going to have to be, especially with I've done experiments with European Excel, and although they were successful, we did waste a significant amount of like pulses per second just having to make decisions.
I do think that a lot of the work that we do as instrument scientists is also based on, for example, it's like data driven. It's a lot of like pattern detection, for example. I think computers can do a very similar job to what we can do. then probably they can do it. Whether it comes to like the timelines for LSLS 2HE, I do think there's some time for us to learn how to cope with these like new data rates. You can, for example, think about taking your time with the alignment, like dealing with the things that are not automated yet at the moment. And then, for example, like switching to sample as soon as you're ready to start collecting data. So I'm not too concerned there. But of course, like any developments and any progress that we can make in this area will directly translate to us being able to collect more data going forward.
So just to follow up on that just a little bit, I mean, Nick brought this up even at 2 kilohertz, that the need to kind of squeeze people out of the decision-making loop. But the logical endpoint of that is squeezing the users out altogether and doing what Martin was talking about, where you have basically a fixed set of experiments and a framework, that everybody is kind of then, able to build on top of the data product, but they're not getting to design the data product themselves. So mail-in is kind of a step in that direction, right? And is this where things are going to go? Do you think in the long run that it'll be a much more fixed function kind of facility, or that facilities will be much more fixed function?
I was going to respond to Alex. I'm all for it, but I'm a little worried because one of the strengths of LCLS in the past is the ability to do sort of these multimodal experiments where just for this one study, you want to bring something different like infrared illumination or something like that. So how do you incorporate these heterogeneous types of data? So automation is great when we can get it. But I was going to ask Elise specifically, in the mail-in program, are there maybe special cases where you want human thinking in the loop?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, like a huge part of like our success is being able to sit as a team and decide, for instance, like deciding to not use, say, municipal education software because we're finding that the results aren't that great. Like a automation tool, if you incorporate a GSAS2 workflow into all the processing pipelines, but it's like actual success rate is super low, the computer is not going to tell us that. That's a human intervention thing. And also we make decisions about the samples. We prep the samples. We can automatically decide pretty quickly on not a great sample for our use case. And I do think that humans should be present, but it's more when we're in data collection, that being able to take to monitoring things, for instance, monitoring beam drift, monitoring photon energy issues, monitoring the error propagation that comes along with an Excel, where we have these huge numbers of like events that happen, motors and positions and all these different diodes. Having computational tools that convert us quickly and also modify those things and change them back to a steady state allows us then to use our brains for like more of the science case aspect of experiments. But I also do think that LCOS can do both. I think that measurements are an important part of kind of being able to adapt to LCOS 2HE operates. But what I'm hoping is that a measurement type program like the mail-in program frees up instrument scientists and time to be able to dedicate more efforts to these very exciting hero experiments where we're doing things like time resolution studies and kind of the more exciting. Like for instance, we dedicate night shifts to measurements where you don't have to do that much thinking, where it is pretty automated. We want to get to that point, but then during the day we work on kind of exciting experiments where we have more user support from staff and like sleep deprivation, for instance.
I do think we also may have to start relying even stronger on what we at LCLS call like standard configurations. So you do have like a certain static setup that you'll be using for an experiment. And now you can imagine that within, for example, like a month time frame, you try to crank out as many experiments as possible within that static framework, and then take a week or two to then build or work towards like another different configuration that, for example, complex or
Yeah. So just to react to Nick, I mean, I wasn't trying to say this was a good thing, that we head towards more kind of cookie cutter setups, but it does seem like there's an inevitable kind of economic logic that as the facilities become more capable, then all the downtime, you're wasting more resource, right? And the time to kind of set up and configure a custom experiment, you know, is an example of that. So I just don't know what they're curious.
I wanna also comment on that from the perspective of computing, where there's a big temptation to view, like to think about economics of things like, oh, well, we've got all these GPUs, for example, they cost $100 million. So every second they're not spent like turning electrical power into thermal power is a waste. But at the same time, and I think LCLS is a really great example of this, having real-time, we have a real-time queue. What a real-time queue really is we have a cabinet off to the edge and we do not worry if there's zero load on that, because there's always a chance that someone's experiment can go and plug into there and then it's available for that. So when you think about economics, it's very tempting to think like a thing that's available but unused is underutilized when that is necessarily the case. Anyway, that was sort of I think we are also I think Elliot is
We're
looking
running
at me.
into our lunch hour
Yeah.
now, so probably is time to wrap this up, but we can continue these conversations over lunch.